What is JHipster Lite and why should you care? Hi, I'm Julien Dubois. I'm the creator and lead developer of JHipster, and today we're going to talk about JHipster and JHipster Lite, which is a new project under the JHipster organization. I also work for Microsoft, where I lead the JavaScript and the Java developer advocacy team, so I do a lot of Java and JavaScript in my day-to-day job, and that's why JHipster is so important for me. If you have any feedback, or if you just want to ping me, you can contact me on Twitter at Julien Dubois. So, we're going to talk about first JHipster, because that's the core of our project here. We're going to introduce you to JHipster Lite, and we're going to do a full demo about JHipster Lite. And more generally speaking, we'll talk about the principles between JHipster and JHipster Lite, which are great developer experience, code quality, let's say general developer enjoyment, and great way of producing project to production. Of course, we'll talk about open source. JHipster and JHipster Lite are both under the JHipster organization, which is a French non-profit association. I'm currently the president of the association, and as such, I can guarantee you that all the code that you do on JHipster, everything that you share, well, will be in our non-profit organization, and nobody is going to try to sell you some business feature out of JHipster. It will, and it's forced, it will always be open source and free to everyone. So if you want to have some fun with us and join a great open source project, please ping me and join the project. Now, what we're going to talk about is JHipster Lite, and for that I need to go back in time a little bit and tell you why we created JHipster, but also why Springboard and Spring Framework were created. So, 15 years ago, the Spring Framework was created, and it was full of those delicious ingredients. You had Spring MVC, Spring IOC, Spring Security, Spring Transactions, Spring GDBC. They are all wonderful, but if you want to use them together, you needed at the time to do a lot of XML configuration, and that was tedious and error-prone, and was taking time, and was removing most of the joy you could have by developing a Spring Boot project. That's why 6 years ago, Spring Boot arrived, and with Spring Boot, you had that joy back. With Spring Boot, all those ingredients are still there, but they are already prepared for you, so they are easy to use. It's fast, it's easy, it's wonderful, and that's why Spring Boot is so popular today. About at the same time as when Spring Boot was created, I created JHipster, and JHipster had kind of the same idea, but we wanted to go beyond that. With JHipster, we also provide you a front-end, either Angular, React, or Vue. We provide lots of third-party integrations with database access, testing, code quality, lots of tooling, Docker, everything is pre-configured for you. And we also have a strong focus to production. So you are always ready to deploy your app to production, typically on Azure, because I work for Azure, but also with other cloud providers like Google or Amazon. So that's why JHipster was created, and also why JHipster is so popular. Now, that wonderful plate that we serve you, well, for some people, it's a bit too big. In fact, we have a spectrum of users. We've got students and newcomers to the Java ecosystem, and those people are very happy to have the full plate set for them without much questions. For people who are more experienced, well, they realize that we provide them with a lot of modules and code that might not be necessary or that they want to tweak, and for them, it's a bit too much. And that's what they don't like about JHipster. So we realize that, and for JHipster Lite, our goal is to have the same idea, but more modular, so people can choose and pick whatever modules that they want, always with the same great taste and ideas from JHipster, but with more control. And with more control, they can have, of course, something more specific to their needs. So, what is great about JHipster, and well, what is still great with JHipster today, and what will be great with JHipster Lite, is that we share the same ideas and philosophy. We want to have a great developer experience. We want to have a big number of options which all work together consistently. For example, with JHipster, if you choose Hibernate, we know you don't want to use MongoDB. We know you want to use a SQL database, so we will provide you a SQL database configuration. And we know then if you select a cache, well, probably you want a second level cache. So when you choose options in JHipster, they all work in a smart way. And that's what some of our competitors can't do. And that's what makes JHipster so popular, is that we've got lots of options and they all work smartly together. We want to keep that with JHipster Lite, but we want to automate this because with JHipster, all of this is hard-coded, and that's a ton of work for the team maintaining JHipster. JHipster is also popular because we provide you with the full range of possible applications, from a monolith full-stack application with an Angular front-end, PostgreSQL database, something very classical, and I would say what most people would use. But we also provide you with some lighter microservice options, and here you would have lots of smaller JHipster instances. We've got service discovery, configuration, security, all working out of the box. And whether you prefer the big monolith or the small microservices, everything works out of the box and is provided for you by JHipster. We want to keep that, of course, with JHipster Lite. And last thing that we want to keep in our philosophy is always be ready for production. From the start, we always provide production-ready options, so you can be assured that when you start your project with JHipster or JHipster Lite, you will go to production without issues. So those are our core principles that we want to keep. But with JHipster Lite, we want to provide new things. And as we saw with a big hamburger, we wanted to improve a few things. The first thing we wanted to improve is composability. We've got lots of modules. Everything is hard-coded with JHipster. That's because JHipster is a bit old. It's coded with a technology called Yeoman, which is a JavaScript framework. Yeoman is great to get started, great to hack, great to get a community building the project because everything is easy to do. It's only JavaScript. But the issue with Yeoman is, well, it's showing its edge and it's not very modular. There has been some ideas of modularity, but it's not really working very well. So we want to change this. We want to change also extensibility. A lot of people want to customize the JHipster project for their own needs. And so with Yeoman, it's possible with some things that we call blueprint or modules in JHipster, but it's a bit hard. And with JHipster Lite, we want to have something much easier. And last but not least, we want to improve maintenance, both from the team coding the project, but also for the people like you using the project. The issue with maintenance, well, first starts with Yeoman. It's JavaScript. It's a big, complicated JavaScript project, so maintenance is hard for us. But also, it creates a project that is hard to maintain sometimes for the end users. So now we've got people who have been using JHipster for years, and we've got some great feedback. And we realize that when we provide a new version of JHipster, you probably want to update your application to use that latest version of JHipster, and it's complicated. So it depends on what we change. I would say most of the time it's easy, but sometimes it's complicated, and we cannot guarantee if it will be simple or not in the future. That's something also that we want to change. For all those changes, well, we've got some new technologies and new ideas which have appeared. The first new technologies, well, and existing technologies which have changed is around Java. So again, JHipster is done with JavaScript. JHipster Lite is coded in Java, and Java has evolved tremendously across the last 6 or 7 years. GraalVM has appeared and provides us also with new possibilities for CLI and fast runtimes. We've got also Mustache, which is a great templating language, and which is easier than what we have with Yeoman, but that's a good thing. With Mustache, we realize that we've got much cleaner and efficient templates than what we used to have. And so those new technologies allow us to have something which is better to develop, much faster for us, better testability, better tooling. Everything is better and faster with Java. Second thing, so we discovered that maintenance was an issue with JHipster. And since the last few years, we've got a new architecture which has arrived, which has emerged, which is called Hexagon Architecture. So classical JHipster projects are created with what we call a layered architecture. So you've got a GPR layer, a service layer, and a REST API layer. And that's very easy to get started, very easy to use, and of course, performant. So people like this approach, but it's very limited when your project grows. And that's part of the issue we add with more experienced people. And also it makes the project hard to maintain and update when there are new versions of JHipster, which is also something that we wanted to fix. So with JHipster Lite, we want to push the Hexagon architecture. We don't really want to force it. We will probably still provide also the option to do a layered architecture, but we want to push that Hexagon architecture because we believe it's better for JHipster projects. And then the most important part where we spent a lot of time, we've got a new API for JHipster. So JHipster Lite provides a full REST API with modules which are exposed and which have rules between them. I'm going to do a demo. It will be much easier to understand when you see that live. But that has been a lot of work, and that is what gives us a lot more flexibility and power than what we used to have with JHipster, because with JHipster, everything is hard-coded. And now, thanks to that API, we can program everything. So let's finish with a slide and get started with JHipster Lite. So it will be all clearer with a demo. So I'm in my JHipster Lite project. I'm going to go to Target and run it. As you can see, JHipster Lite is now a Java project. It's coded with Springboard, and JHipster Lite itself is a JHipster Lite application. It makes much more sense for us, and again, the tooling is much better and everything much faster than what we have with JHipster. My application is running. Let me access it in my web browser. So that's the default UI we provide. And here you can already see we've got lots of modules which are available. There are other UI which are available. There's the REST API, which is directly available. And in the future, we'll also provide simpler UIs for beginners. This UI is mostly for, I would say, normal users, people who want control and who know JHipster a bit. And I would say that the normal people, if you are completely getting started, it might be too complicated. And for that, we need to go back to what we provide today with JHipster. So that JHipster Lite, if we have a look at all those modules, you can see I've got some green stuff. If I go here, some red stuff. So it goes from left to right. I'm going to start my project here on the left, and I will finish my project here on the right with something much more complicated that we will build step by step. That's also one of the new features that is provided by JHipster Lite is now you can either build a full stack project from the start, like we do with JHipster, but we can also go step by step. And that gives me two great opportunities. So the first one, maybe I don't need the full stack app. Maybe I don't need security. Maybe I don't need the database. So I can have something much simpler, which is the initial issue we wanted to fix. But also maybe you want the full thing. Maybe you want security, you want the database and everything, but you don't need all of them right now. So maybe for the first weeks of the project, you can have that simpler application, and then you will build step by step that application with JHipster Lite. And that provides you also with more simplicity from the start than than a complex project. So let's get started. I'm going to work in a local folder. So let me create a new empty directory. I'm going to start IntelliJ in that directory. Of course, the directory is empty, so IntelliJ will find an empty project. There's nothing here. And I'm going to take that directory and copy paste it into JHipster Lite. So we're going to work in that folder here. By the way, I'm running it locally here. You can also use the web version. It's the same application, of course. But if you run it on the web, you're going to work into a distant directory. So what I'm going to do, it will be a little bit more complex, but then you don't have to install everything. So it's a choice. Well, let's start with local installation, and let's see how we can get started very quickly and build a full stack application using JHipster Lite. So first thing, I'm going to initialize my project. That's the first module. It's the easiest one. You can see I've got some red. It's because I need to give it a name and a short name. So I'm going to apply those. This has been applied. Let me go back to IntelliJ, and IntelliJ has seen that a few files have been created. Like I've got a README file, which is pretty empty because currently we have nothing. And if we go to Git, we have the first commit here. with those few files which have been added. So we can see that now we can build our project step by step, and we've got a Git history. We'll come back to that in a moment. Now let's build something a little bit more concrete than just initialize the project. I want to create a Springboard project. So let me just click here, and you can see that some intermediary modules have been selected. That's the first concept that I want to show you, is that now we've got dependencies between modules. We know that if you want to use Springboot, you need Java-based, and if you want Java-based, you need Maven Java, etc., etc. So now we've got relationships between modules. That's the first important thing that allows us to do that great UI. So, and I need now to give it a package name for my Java app, because now it's a Java app. I'm going to apply those 3 new packages. They've been applied. Let me go back to IntelliJ here, and in Git, we see here those new modules which have been applied. And here, IntelliJ saw it was a Maven project, so now it's seen as a Java project, and I can just open it up, and my yellow app is a Springboot app that I can start. IntelliJ immediately recognized it as a Java application, so I can start my yellow app and enjoy my application. This is a very simple application. It's using, again, an hexagonal architecture. We'll have a full demo of the hexagonal architecture at the end of this talk. Let's first have a look at what we generate, and then we will have a closer look at those files. So my app started. It was pretty fast, 700 milliseconds, and it stopped. It's not a web app yet. Again, we're doing here something much simpler than what we were doing before with JHipster. With JHipster, by default, it was always a web app. This time, you can even do a batch application. It's not even a web app. So again, you can do something much simpler, more modular, because we've got this new UI with modules, which is far more powerful than what we have with JHipster. Now, of course, let's do a web app. Let's do something a bit more complicated. And for my web app, here we're going to see a second concept. So first of all, let me select here Undertow. I want to use Undertow as a web server for my application. I need to set up a port, so 8080 by default. I'm going to apply it. And if I go back to my application here, we've got some new classes that have appeared. And if I rebuild my project, I'm going to be able to start it again. And we're going to see in the logs that this is a web app using Undertow. Here it is. It's an Undertow with GBoss and so on. Undertow is here. Everything is running. It's a little bit slower because now we've got that web server, and it's running here on port 8080. Well, no need to spend too much time on this. It's a default 404 error page from Springboot. So that's wonderful, but I'm not happy. I didn't want to use Undertow. I wanted to use Tomcat. Now we're going to see a few of the things we can do with JHipster Lite, which are impossible to do with JHipster or with any competitors that I know of. So the second concept I wanted to show you with modules, so the first concept is that we've got dependencies between modules. I can only use Undertow if I selected Springboot. But the second concept we have is what we call features. So our web server here can either be Tomcat, Undertow, or Netty. If I choose Undertow, I cannot choose Tomcat now anymore. I need to choose one of those features. It's the same thing for the front end. If we look here at Client Core, I can use Svelte, Vue, Angular, or React. I can only use one of them. And once one is selected, well, I need to use that one, and I cannot use the other ones. That's what we used to add code before, and that we don't need to do anymore because now our REST interface is very smart and can manage this for us. So I selected Undertow. I wanted to use Tomcat. What can I do? Well, because we use everything with Git and everything is cleanly coded, it's going to be very simple. I just go back to my Git interface. Here is Undertow. I'm going to revert that commit. There are different ways, of course, to do that with Git, but I'm just using the easiest one. Now we don't have Undertow anymore. We're back to the Spring Boot module. In fact, if I refresh my app here, you can see now that the green tick, so what has been applied, is still on those modules, but not on Undertow anymore. Undertow is selected, but it doesn't have the green tick. It hasn't been applied. The UI is so that we removed that commit and that we are back to that previous state. Now I can choose Tomcat instead. And let me apply Tomcat. If I go back now to IntelliJ here, you can see that Tomcat appeared. I'm going to build the project again. And now this time when I'm going to start this project, instead of using Undertow, well, that project is going to use Tomcat. Let me run my app. And as you can see, we're using Tomcat now. So I was able to change my module very easily using Git and also change my feature thanks to JHipster Lite. That's extremely powerful and not something that was possible before with JHipster. So I've shown you why this new interface and concept is great, but you're going to tell me, yeah, but can you do something as complex, as complete as what you can do with JHipster today? Well, we can go quite far with it. So let me do something a bit more complicated than this. So first of all, I'm going to add a database. I'm going to use PostgreSQL. I want to update it using Liquibase. That's what we do with JHipster by default. I want to have Springboard Actuator for having some monitoring of my app. I want to use, let's say, GitHub Codespaces to code. I want to use GitHub Actions for CI/CD. I want to use, maybe I want a front end. I want Vue. I want my front end with Vue. So that's one of the features I have here. I want, of course, security. So let me go a little bit more to the right to have something now a little bit similar to what we have with a classical JHipster application. We've got security, we've got a front end, we've got a database, we've got monitoring, we've got CI/CD. Kind of looks like what you can create with JHipster, but here everything is much more modular. Let me apply those. And once they're applied, we're going to go to IntelliJ again and have a look at what happened. So it's so that we added some Node.js configuration. So by default, I'm having npm install running. Well, let's start a look first on the front end. You will see that, first of all, it's similar to what we have with JHipster, but it's at the same time simpler and more powerful. So we've got here a little change of philosophy. With JHipster, we are generating everything for you. And again, it's with a layered architecture with a CRUD point of view. So create, retrieve, update, delete. That's not the case here. So here we generate a front end which is much simpler, but which uses the default tools provided by that front end. So here for Vue, we're using Vite, which is the default front end, CLI, to develop Vue applications. And that's not exactly what we were doing with JHipster. So we're doing something which is at the same time simpler and more powerful. Let me start here my front end, npm start. And let me here go to that front end. Let me add a new tab, and Vite is here. So I've got that new front end. So that's very similar to what you would do with JHipster, but you've got much less options here in the UI. You've got a much simpler UI. And that UI works with the default tooling from Angular, React, or Vue. So if you're an expert in those technologies, you will probably find it much easier for you to develop. Let me just show you how fast this is. We still have hot reload like what we had, like what we have currently, with JHipster. So if I go to the home page here, you see we got like Vue 3, TypeScript, everything. That's what is written here. I'm going to say hello, and I'm going to say like now. As you can see, it's immediately changed. So let's say world now, and I'm going to change like now, and immediately it's changed. So much better performance than what we have with JHipster, but also a simpler UI. So that's one of the main differences between JHipster and JHipster Lite. We use the new toolings that have appeared in the past few years for those front ends. They are much simpler than what we provide, but they are also more powerful. So we believe it's interesting for some people, not everyone probably. Now that we've seen the front end, let's work on the back end again. So we selected a database, we selected PostgreSQL, and as always, JHipster provides you with a full test suite. So let's first have a look at the test suite here. So everything is being tested. We've got excellent code quality on what is being provided. And well, that's very similar to what we have with JHipster. And the main difference here is that we've got better test coverage. We have more tests. And also they're much faster. So if we run all the tests, everything is running usually in a few seconds. There's a couple of tests here which are a bit slow, especially there's one test which tests if the database connection is slow, that it should manage that the database connection is slow. So of course that test is a bit slow. Otherwise everything is pretty fast. Please note, I'm not using Docker at the moment, so I'm using test containers for my test, and I've got this new tool which is called Test Container Cloud, and Test Container Cloud is allowing my test to run faster without also Docker installed. So I've got everything running in a few seconds here, as you can see, 6 seconds, and most of that time was spent testing a connection test here, which is slow, which is normal. So very good testing support. And now I'm going to run my app. So to run my app this time, I need to run Docker. So let me start Docker because I need the database. So that's very classical if you have been using JHipster in the past. We've got a Docker Compose file which has been generated. That's because I selected PostgreSQL. If I selected MySQL or I don't know, Kafka, I will have had some other YAML configuration files here for those services. And as I've got this Docker Compose file available, I can run it here. So there are many ways to run a Docker Compose file, of course, but easiest one is using Docker here. And now that my database is running, I can run my app again with the database. And this time I've got a full app running. So with a front end, a back end, a database, a security. So everything that basically we had with JHipster. So here we have been able to generate something very similar to a JHipster project. So again, you now have more flexibility in what you choose, but if you want the full experience, you still have the full experience if you want it and if you need it. Now, let's finish by speaking about Hexagon Architecture, because I've been talking a lot about it, but I haven't shown it too much about it. If you go here to our Java packages, you can see we've got some packages which are not usual if you are using a layered application. That's because we have that Hexagon Architecture. If you want to test it, the easiest way is to go back here to JHipster, JHipster Lite, sorry. And we're going to select a few things. So first of all, here I want the documentation for Hexagon Architecture. That's going to help us. And here we've got what we call dummy. So dummy is a sample app showing you how you should do an Hexagon Architecture. So I want to use the dummy GPFS instance here. And that allows me also to show you what happens when not all the modules can work together. You can see I've got some red stuff here, so I need to fix some stuff. It's because I need to select some features, and well, JHipster Lite doesn't know which feature to choose at the moment. So what it wants here is I want Liquibase to manage my changelog, and for that we also need Spring MVC Open API. We need testing with Cucumber. We need the DEMI feature, the Liquibase changelog, and the GPF assistant. So I've selected all of those. I'm going to apply them. And so this will probably take some time because now we added view and so on. We've got more checks going on. Let me just show you the console here. You can see that now we've got some new tests that are being applied to our code because we have prettier and some linters because we've got some front-end stuff. So now when I git commit, everything is a bit slower than before because we've got a git pre-commit hook that has been applied. As soon as all those modules have been applied, we're going to enjoy this new application here that has been generated. Here it is. So we can see the dummy package here, and we can see our Hexagon Architecture available. So let's first have a look at the documentations because we also generate documentation. And what is important here is this Hexagon Architecture documentation that is going to explain to you how you should develop an Hexagon Architecture for your application. So the important part is this graph. The way we code our application now is that we've got a domain model, and that domain model has got ports. So you've got primary adapters, so that are things that are driving your application, typically the web UI. And you've got secondary adapters, which are what your application is driving, typically the persistence. So if we go here to our dummy module, we can see that we've got an application here called B application service. And it has got some domain objects which are neutral. They don't belong to the front end or the back end. And we've got some infrastructure here. We've got the primary port. So as we saw, those are driving my application. So this is my REST API. We can see here we've got an API here, REST API driving my app. And we've got secondary ports here. So those are my GPA entity. And those GPA entities are what my application is driving. So my application is applying those to the database. Now, if I just start my application again, as we're using Liquibase, well, everything is going to be updated, including my database code. And I will have a full application using an Hexagon architecture, which is available. And it's a very good way to get started with Hexagon architecture. So here, if I go to database, data source, PostgreSQL, here it is. And by default, it's my database is YOLO, because that's the name of my project. And the user is YOLO. So if I connect here, I should be able to see my database. Refresh. 3 tables, and I've got the beer, which is here. And those 2 tables are for Liquibase on usage to lock your database before updating it. So as you can see here, we were able to do a full application, full stack application, as we were able to do with JHipster, and what we are still able to do with JHipster, but we have much more modularity, and so we have probably more power if you are an advanced user. So just to summarize what we just saw, JHipster Lite is a new project under the JHipster organization. It does things very differently from JHipster. You have more modularity, more power, but you can still do something probably as complex as JHipster. Then you've got some differentiations. First of all, we push here an hexagonal architecture. It's probably today more for advanced users than JHipster. And also, we don't have the huge community that we have in JHipster. So in JHipster, you can create a Quarkus application, a Microdot application, even a .NET or a Node.js application. That's because we've had lots of users. We've got more than 600 people who contributed code to JHipster. So JHipster has this huge user base and those years of work, which are impossible to do here in JHipster Lite. So JHipster Lite today has a more limited use case for Spring Boot people, but I would say that's probably 95% of our users in JHipster. And also it's more today aimed at advanced users and people who want to do an hexagonal architecture. So it's not really a direct competitor to JHipster. By the way, also it's lacking the CRUD support from JHipster. So let me just go to start.jhipster.tech. What everybody wants on JHipster is the GDL Studio. This is a huge game changer for JHipster, but that only works for a CRUD architecture. So that doesn't work for JHipster Lite yet. Maybe we'll find a way. That's one of the things we need to work on. So I hope I showed you a lot of things, a lot of ideas that we have in JHipster Lite, and that you are able to use it right now. If you just go to lite.jhipster.tech, you can already try it and have fun with it. Also, don't hesitate to send us feedback, maybe even contribute if you see some things that are lacking and you know how to code them. Honestly, it's, let's say, a little bit harder to get started at the beginning because it's an hexagonal architecture. But in the end, because the tooling is much better and the architecture is much better, you will enjoy it more and you will be much more efficient and the maintenance will be easier. So please, if you want to join us and if you want to send us feedback, it's very, very welcome. That's the main reason why I do this kind of talks. Thank you.